Okay, let's get started. I'd like to introduce myself first to everybody. My name is Anne-Marie Murphy. I'm an adjunct senior scholar here at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute. I'm also a professor at the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton University. And on behalf of the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, the New York Southeast Asian Network, the China in the World Program, and the APEC Study Center, the more organizations you have that want to sponsor your event, the better it is, right? So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here today for a talk on U.S. China-Southeast Asia relations, opportunities, and challenges. As we all know, the U.S. and China are engaged in an increasingly intensifying strategic competition for leadership and enhancing their influence throughout the world. In recent times, Southeast Asia has become the epicenter of that strategic competition, creating both opportunities and challenges for all three areas involved. So today, we are here to discuss the release of a report by the Asia Foundation. So what I'm going to do at this point is turn it over to John Brandon, who is the Senior Director of International Programs at the Asia Foundation, and he will introduce the project and the three speakers. John?
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a while since I've been last in Colombia, so it's always nice to come back. On behalf of the Foundation, I'm very pleased to have all of you here to launch our report, U.S. China-Southeast Asia Relations, Challenges and Opportunities for Regional Cooperation. This report came out of a workshop that we organized in Bangkok in mid-May of this year. And the Foundation partnered with the Center for Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and also the Thailand Development Research Institute in Bangkok. We brought together 21 distinguished scholars, think tank representatives, and government officials from the United States, China, and Southeast Asia, basically to explore the central questions. What are the priorities and concerns of the U.S., China, and Southeast Asia in the coming decades? And inevitably, the workshop was drawn to related issues. Among them were changes and alliances in China, the U.S., and ASEAN, the status of ASEAN centrality, the politicalization of trade and investment in the region, the roles that China and the U.S. intend to play, and Southeast Asia's expectations from its relations with the United States and China. This report offers American, Chinese, and Southeast Asian perspectives from the workshop's two-day discussion. And we're very pleased to have the report's authors with us here today. Let me introduce them briefly. Immediately to my left is Dr. David M. Lampton. He's the Hyman Professor Emeritus at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington and former president of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. Dr. Lampton is currently a senior research fellow at SAIS's Foreign Policy Institute. He's also chairman emeritus of the Asia Foundation's Board of Trustees. His most recent book is Living U.S.-China Relations from Cold War to Cold War, which was published earlier this year. Next to Professor Lampton is Dr. Da Wei. He is the director of the Center for Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Professor Da Wei's research expertise covers China-U.S. relations and U.S. security foreign policy, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Earlier this year, he was a senior fellow at Stanford University, and I also want to say that he was, with his Center for International Security and Strategy, was an integral partner for the Foundation in helping this workshop happen. And then our third speaker, to the far left, is Dr. Kuik Cheng-Chwee. He's a professor of international relations at the National University of Malaysia's Institute of Malaysian and International Studies in Kuala Lumpur. He, along with Selena Ho in Singapore, co-authored a book with Professor Lampton about 4 years ago titled Rivers of Iron, Railroads and Chinese Power in Southeast Asia. So we have three speakers who have a lot of experience and who study this topic deeply. And so I want to thank also Anne-Marie, who's been a longtime colleague and friend. And so thank you very much to you and Columbia University and all the institutes to hold today's discussion. And finally, the report, this project was supported generously by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So with that, let me leave it there, and then I'll turn it back over to Anne-Marie, and we can begin our discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John. I think without further ado, we're going to ask the three speakers to make their presentation. They'll each talk for about 6 minutes or so, and we're going to go in the order in which their contributions are listed in the report, which means we'll start with Mike Lampton and then go to Dao-Wei and finish up, last but not least, with Kuik Cheng-Chwee. Please.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. It's good to be here and see Andy. We started our careers pretty much at the same time. So, and also good to see people that have SAIS connections in the audience as well. So glad to be here. I noted in your opening remarks, one of the first 3 words was competition. Mm-hmm. And I should make clear that each of us doesn't speak for any organization in our respective countries, don't mean to attribute views to individuals here that may share to a greater or lesser extent, but I think it's surprising the degree to which we actually had basic consensus. So I'll dare to say, first of all, I think we all believe, but I'll certainly say that I don't think competition is a very useful framework for producing cooperation among the United States, China, and Southeast Asia. And it's going to be very difficult for Southeast Asia to negotiate between increasing strategic competition and economic competition and diplomatic competition. So I think if there's a kind of core underlying idea, are we going to have a cooperative relationship, a minimally cooperative relationship in Southeast Asia with competition as the framework? For one, I'm quite skeptical of that. I think the report in its own implications is, but I don't want to attribute that conclusion. That conclusion in Washington is greeted with some, let's say, anxiety. That's not the correct answer. And if you ask what are some of the words that might provide a better stability, growth, equilibrium. These are the words that I think Southeast Asia wants to hear, not strategic competition. So just to sort of bracket this whole thing, where when you look at the report, if you have the opportunity to do so, I think that's the key issue undergirding it, and in each of its own ways, the contributors, and I think we're speaking to that issue. So then that's sort of point one. Point two is, what is driving this strategic competition such as it is? And I think from my own view, there are sort of 3 broad drivers of this competition. One is the securitization of almost all of the issues. And I think we all agree, if security is the primary driver, it will set where economic and diplomatic and educational and cultural relations, and they will be subordinated and viewed through the lens of securitization. That's true in the United States. It's true. I think that's almost a universal law. If you got security as a primary worry, it's going to drive everything into a subordinate position. So securitization, and I think you have to say we are in an arms race with China, and that's finding reflection in both how we're thinking of making allies, what weapon sales are being sold to who by who, and of course the arms race with the United States and China most directly. So I think that's sort of driver one. We can certainly talk about it. We're not attributing blame, because once the process gets going, it's an action-reaction. And so it's maybe an interesting discussion. Who's more responsible, if anybody, for driving this? But now it's a process, and it's under its own steam. Secondly, I think we certainly have, when you look at globalization and its impact and polarization, lots of reasons for this. But basically, the United States, and of course China has, I would say, always had a greater degree of both protectionism and industrial policy. And so I think government priorities are driving investments, technology transfer, tariffs, all of this. Certainly one of the big positive integrative forces was economic interdependence. And that's, in a way, getting assaulted by how we're trying to manage economic relations in the interests of our strategic rivalry, maybe put it that way. So I think that's driver two, sort of industrial policy protectionism. And thirdly, it sounds strange to say Mao and Nixon strategically kind of took ideology out of the relationship, although you could say they were both ideological in a fundamental way. That is to say, we're going to manage the relationship without reference to political system difference, that the U.S. doesn't have a regime change objective buried down in its motivation for its activity. And I think ideology is getting reintroduced into the relationship. We can, you can have your attitude about that, but when you define your global policy as autocracy versus democracy, a lot of things follow, including you don't invite Singapore to your summit of the democracies, although pragmatically, we cooperate very well in many dimensions with Singapore, right? So I think we have to look at the drivers of this if we're going to try and moderate it, and I think ideology is certainly one thing. I'll just end this by, this strategic competition was a long time in coming, and like an onion, I try to peel back, where did the sort of tipping point on this thing happen? And I at least go back to 95, 96. And you could say, I'm not blaming Lee Deng-Hui, but he goes to Cornell. We end up with China firing missiles. The US sends aircraft carriers, and Jiang Zemin says, this is never going to happen again where we have no choice. Strategically, we're building up. I think that was a very important moment. Now you can go earlier, but at that moment. So from my point of view, we've been about 30 years in building this Ibu. And it's going to take us a long time. There's no silver bullet to this. And but I think we all believe in a way that one of the things that could be moderating is to have greater solidarity in ASEAN and build a center that is a more geopolitically has an interest in stability, equilibrium, economic growth. And I think that's where the center of gravity is among most of the Southeast Asian countries. And just the last sentence is, I think we also contemplate, what if there were conflict in the Taiwan Straits, a high level of conflict, and or the South China Sea, and we think that would probably, so I think, would drive ASEAN apart, and we would lose one of our greatest assets for stability. And so we've really got to manage the South China Sea and Taiwan, not only for their own intrinsic importance, but it would have, I think, a very deleterious effect on Southeast Asia. And I think the Southeast Asians don't want that. Yeah, is that enough?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Professor Darwin, may I ask you to speak, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Emeritus, and thank SIPA for hosting us. I'm Dawei. I'm from Tsinghua University, Beijing. I'm the director for Center for International Security and Strategy there. So it's really my great honor to be here, and also my great privilege working with the Asia Foundation. Early this May, convened a trilateral dialogue workshop with American colleagues and scholars from ASEAN countries. So I always say in past 1.5 years, I myself attended several trilateral or bilateral dialogues between China, U.S. and also sometimes we say U.S. China plus. We were in Geneva with the American colleagues on the Middle East. We were in Dubai with American colleagues on Ukraine. We were in Bangkok this May with American and Asian scholar on Southeast Asia country trilateral. So on each of those each of those occasions, surprisingly, I always found that the differences, the gaps between no matter two sides or three parties are much narrower or smaller than we expected. So all than we read on newspaper, on media, on social media. So this is my general takeaway from the Bangkok meeting this May. So I'm very happy that we can contribute each of us a piece to this publication. And today I also want to talk about something actually followed what Professor Mike Lampton said. You know, competition and China-U.S. versus ASEAN country. Very sadly, from China's perspective, very sadly, the region China is in is evolving from the concept of the Asia-Pacific into a new concept of Indo-Pacific. Of course, no matter you call it the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific, it's just a term. But so far, Chinese government still has not accepted the Indo-Pacific. The only exception is when we working with ASEAN, we think that ASEAN countries Indo-Pacific outlook for China is pretty acceptable, I will say. But generally speaking, we don't like the term Indo-Pacific. The reason I think behind that is, or the mindset there, when we mentioned Asia-Pacific, you know, immediately we will think of economic development, regional integration, stability, peace and stability. But when we think of Indo-Pacific, geopolitical conflict or major power competition. So in China we always say a theme of something, 时代主题 or regional theme, 地区的主题, has been replaced. The old theme was the peace and development in the region, has been replaced by confrontation and the competition, which is, of course, China does not like it because China really benefited from a stable and peaceful, prosperous, and also integrated Asia-Pacific region. So this is the general picture. And we are in a very interesting timing now, I mean, for this event and also for our Bangkok meetings, workshop. This is the year of the U.S. presidential election. There are some debate, discussion here in the U.S. about the strategic competition thing, what are the end game. So we heard different voices on the spectrum. And also after the summit in San Francisco last year between President Xi and President Biden, I think we are in a period of relative stability of bilateral relations between China and the U.S. So that gave us a chance to rethinking the bilateral relations, I mean China-U.S. About this strategic competition and what does that mean for the region, for ASEAN country. I have to say, of course, we have something competing. For example, we compete for high tech, right? Which country is good, more, is better in terms of AI or 5G or other, high tech. And we are competing for a stronger military, whose military is stronger, particularly given the background that Mike mentioned, the potential conflict over like Taiwan or some other places, the South China Sea. And what else are we competing for besides these two areas? I'm not very sure. Are we competing for ideology like Soviet Union and the US? I don't think so. I don't think China, particularly I don't think I'm from China. I don't think China have a clear universal ideology that we can use to compete with the US. Are we competing for international order? Is China trying to build, as many people in West believe that China is trying to build a a parallel alternative order? I really doubt. Do we have really, some of the audience are from China. Do we really have a clear vision about that order? I don't think so. Are we competing for the economic power or our economic size or our economy, except for those high-tech part? Are we competing for who can produce more coffee, more, table, shoes? No, I don't think so. Right? Are we competing in different geopolitical region? This is directly related to what the topic we are discussing today. Are we competing in the Middle East? Are we competing in Ukraine? Are we competing in the Southeast Asia country? I think this is a question I really want to. Of course, there are some sometimes we say in China competing elements. Of course, or as Cheng-Chwee always say that maybe we can compete for good, right? Compete for cooperation. But are we really competing for something as a zero-sum, outcome? Are we trying to dominate the region? Are we trying to exclude the other side from the region? I doubt. So this leads to my third point. In Southeast Asia region, if it's a competition, this is a competition neither China nor the US can win. When we're talking about strategic competition, we need to understand what is the criteria for victory. Right? When we have a competition when two athletes compete, they are competing for a gold medal. What is a gold medal in Southeast Asia? I don't know. Maybe some people, hawks in both China and the US may say, I want to exclude the other side, the other country from this region, then that's my victory. I don't want to see the US military alliances in the region. I don't want to see US military base in the US, in Southeast Asian country. I don't want the APAF. I don't want the Indo-Pacific strategy. Maybe some hawks in Beijing will say that. And maybe some people here in the US will say similar thing about China. If so, can we really win that competition? I think the answer is very clear. Ask Professor Kuik, is that possible? ASEAN country already tell us that answer, no, never. Never, you can never exclude the other side from that region. The ASEAN country want balance. They want hedge. I think this is, Mr. Kuik is Mr. Hedge in Malaysia. Sorry, but I mean, this is a competition neither China nor the US can win. So I think we should stop viewing this from the lens of China-US zero-sum game. So I echo what Professor Lampton said, and also this is, as I said, this is a very interesting timing because a lot of people are thinking about U.S.-China relations and their relations in the with the third party in next 4 years. So I think it's a time to think about, is that possible to add some cooperative part in the region, in Southeast Asia countries? It's difficult, but in past few days we discussed some, cooperation, potential cooperation over non-traditional security, for example, climate change, environment protection, public health, people-to-people exchanges. And I think the three sides, particularly China and the US, we need several showcase to tell the region and also tell the hawks in Beijing and the DC that we can cooperate. The competition is not the whole picture. We have some part of cooperative elements in our bilateral relations. And my final word is, I do hope we are very sorry as a bigger country, causing trouble for our neighbors, our friends in Southeast Asian country. But I do hope, in Bangkok, I think I also said that, I hope ASEAN country can use their agency to help us, to force us correct our wrongs. I mean, we always talk about ASEAN centrality. So ASEAN need to be very proactive because you are facing two bigger players. So you need to be very unified and also united, I would say, united and also proactive, leading the regional mechanism and if you are proactive, China and the US, we are facing the, a dilemma, should we join ASEAN or should we not? I mean, China is always very willing to join you in past several decades. I think we'll continue to do that. And Cheng-Chwee have some criticism about the US participation in that region. I agree with you. So if you are proactive, then we are very happy because we feel, China feel very comfortable to join you, and you can force American side to join you too. Then we'll have, as I said in this report, open regionalism. I think that's good, but of course that's very hard. I cannot say I'm too optimistic about that. If we go along current trajectory, this close, regionalism, and we are, if we continue this, we will face at least a confrontation, but maybe a split of ASEAN country and also conflict or war. That will be the worst scenario. Okay, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheng-Chwee?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, my friend, Professor Emeritus Murphy, and a very good afternoon to everyone. Very glad to be here. And let me begin by thanking the Asia Foundation, particularly John Brandon, for including me here in this panel and also for the Bangkok workshop. And let me also express my appreciation to CIPA as well as CWP, China and the World Program, for hosting this. I'm very glad to be here. I'm saying this not just for politeness, for 客套话, but I say this sincerely because of it's an honor to join my teacher, Professor Mike Lampton, my teacher at SAIS, Johns Hopkins, along with my new friends, Professor Dawei, in this panel. And I'm also an alumni of China in the World Program, so very glad to be here. And then seeing my friend, my sister in CWP family, Professor Adela Karai. And I'm also an alumni of Emeritus, many U.S. Southeast Asia alumni programs, both virtually and also in person. So very glad to be here. My friends will remember that I always have 3 points for every presentation. So today I do have 3 points for the next 6 minutes or so. And unlike in DC where we talk about 3 A's, I thought today I would talk about 3 B's. And the 3A was basically about asymmetry, agency, but also allergy. Here, the 3B. The 3B are not selected randomly, but I think these are the 3 B's, the 3 words or words about started from B as an alphabet that better relate to what John, Mike, and also Dawei mentioned earlier on. And these are the 3 B's, the 3 points that I thought reflect very well Southeast Asia as a weaker countries in this U.S.-China triangular relationship. It shows certainly a deep sense of ambivalence about the competition. We don't like the competition, and it's rightly highlighted, but we also know that competition, it's a reality. It is in the DNA of big powers. U.S. and China in this era, even earlier colonization era and Cold War politics, big powers always compete. Weaker countries, we are the potential receiving end or ongoing receiving end. We are ambivalent about it. So these 3 B, the first B, let me highlight, it's about binary. It's about binary threat. Binary threat that we are hearing, we are seeing, we are listening all the time, and we are getting nervous, even though we might be benefited in one way or another. China plus one clearly indicates that we are benefited. But at the same time, we are very nervous, in part because we knew that those benefits might not last very long. As long as one power change the policy, more tariff, benefits will be gone, shift in one way or another. But binary in the way that Dawei and also Mike highlighted in many forms, right? We can take a lot of examples of binary, and those binaries are traps for every one of us. Southeast Asia as the victims, but you also push the 2 competing powers into escalation, so on and so forth. Words like democracies versus autocracies, binary. Are you with us? Are you against us? Are you pro-China? Are you pro-US? Like-minded versus non-like-minded. So binary, so black and white. We in Southeast Asia, we are small, we are weak, but we are not silly. So our reaction when we hear that, are you pro-US or pro-China? Either we say it openly or politely or not, our thinking is always that, do we really have to pro one over the other? Do we really have to choose one side over the other? Our answer, learning from historical experience, is that we don't want to. And at the moment, we don't have to. We can continue to collaborate with the Belt and Road partially, but also at the same time joining IPAF, US-led initiative at the same time. We can do things together. So we think that binary is dangerous, it's trap, because of it would result in unnecessarily confrontation. It will push the competition, which is a reality, into conflict and armed conflict, which is unnecessary and completely dangerous. This leads me to the second B. Binary trap leads to a lot of blind spots. Many blind spots that are reflected in so many mainstream commentaries, articles, and also policy statements. Last month, ANU, Australian National University, asked me to give a keynote, and I talk about blind spots, bright spots, and blinking spots. I won't have time to elaborate that 3 points, but let me just highlight two kind of blind spots that are clearly reflected in both US and China. Professor Dawi early on mentioned about I'm quite critical about some aspect of US policy, but in fact, Southeast Asia are equally critical about China's action and also statements. Leaders might not say it for obvious reasons. We want to keep face, and this is how things are working back in Asia, but it doesn't mean that things that we don't say it or we don't say it openly, they are not there. The sentiments are always there. So what kind of blind spot are we talking about here? Let's talk about US-related blind spot, then we move to the China-related blind spot before I move on to the third B, right? So what kind of blind spot? A blind spot that is so prevalent in mainstream, classic and Western commentaries and also analysis is that always implied or maybe even stated in one way or another, like in Asia or Asia security, there is a principal threat and there is a principal solution. There is a US-related blind spot. What is the threat? The threat is China-related threat. South China Sea, Taiwan, and then it's a threat meaning that you need to come up, join alliance. And alliance meaning US-led alliance. And this is a black and white scenario. Right? Blind spot in the sense that it portrays China and China action as a principal threat, and it portrays US-led efforts, alliance and coalition as a principal solution to tackle that problem. It's kind of common and very loud and clear in mainstream platforms, but in Southeast Asia, again, we are very skeptical about that because why? We are concerned about China-related actions on South China Sea and all that, some more so than the others, claimant countries. Philippines already changed the policy back to the old formula of balancing and alliance first, but other countries, including Vietnam, my own country, Malaysia, Brunei, even Indonesia, not a claimant country in South China Sea, but a littoral state, we are seeing China, yes, part of problems, but is China the immediate direct threat? The answer is not necessarily. It is a risk, it is a danger, but is that the existential threat? The answer reflected in the actions on the part of governments are not quite. Because why? We see that China is part of problem, yes, also part of solutions because of economic importance, performance, legitimacy, so on and so forth. And we might not necessarily see a US as a straightforward principal solution. US is a solution for many things. When it comes to balance of power, certainly we do want to leverage that to constrain China, but we are worried about containment. And we know that there is a thin line between containment and constrainment. So it is a blind spot that related to the mainstream that alliance is the solution, and then the bigger, the better, the more the merrier. We don't buy that. We would go for alignment, and we go for alignment without alliance, and the more alignment, the better, inclusive way. So that would lead me to the China-related blind spot, right? There are a number of, some say that China might put less pressure, unlike the US and also other like-minded countries, quote unquote. But still, the pressure is one way or another. Sometimes implicit, sometimes indirect, right? For example, a commonly heard phrase is that China is today's power, the future power, US is the power of the past. And some would even spoke in Chinese, I like that phrase, like in the sense that it is very telling, but we don't like what is being implied. 识时务者为俊杰, right? Meaning that you got to know, you need to be pragmatic and smart enough to know what is the mainstream and future and long-term trend, implying that China is the present and future power. US is not. US is a declining power. Southeast Asia, we don't like that. Because of imply that we have to choose one side over the other. You are implying that we need to invest more in Chinese basket at the expense of US and others basket. Again, we don't like that. We might not say it, leaders won't say it. Let me be the bad guy academic to say it. So having highlighted the binary threat, and also blind spots, both US and China, let me highlight the third and also the final B. And those Bs are about ASEAN and also Southeast Asia, as response to what Mike and also John and also Dawe highlighted early on, and also to pay respect to my friend Professor Emery Murphy, who is an expert on Southeast Asia and ASEAN. So the third B is what we'll highlight about the ASEAN or Southeast Asia agency. Some say that ASEAN mainstream commentary, for example, say ASEAN is useless, talk shop, only good for taking photo and a very funny gesture, so on and so forth. We in Southeast Asia always see ASEAN as a three-eye agency. ASEAN is a regional organization, but it's a three-eye organization. In what sense? It is imperfect, sometimes inadequate, especially dealing with Myanmar and South China Sea, but always indispensable. Imperfect, inadequate, but always indispensable. Indispensable in a number of things. Number one, intra-ASEAN problems. ASEAN countries is not always united. In fact, that is just a reality. We accept that. You won't be always like-minded or agree, right? Even siblings won't be agreeable all the time, right? So we acknowledge that, yeah? But ASEAN realized that precisely because of their differences, intra-ASEAN differences, we need to work together more. And the third B is about, it's three in one, right? It's about binding, building, and buffering. ASEAN, despite being inadequate and imperfect, is indispensable because it allowed us to bind together. ASEAN countries are very different. Binding itself as a region already not easy. So we also these days, ASEAN, through the ASEAN-led mechanism, bind countries beyond Southeast Asia. The three Northeast Asian countries, China, Japan, South Korea, they were trying to come up with economic arrangement, not possible, they take decades. But finally, through ASEAN-led mechanism, you see binding and building coming together. Example, evidence, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, that came up at the height of COVID. During COVID, you only heard the bad news, but there was a good news. RCEP was born during at the height of COVID, and that is the largest free trade area arrangement in the world. Things that Northeast Asia on their own cannot make it, through ASEAN-led mechanism, you bind and you build cooperation, largest economic arrangement in the world. And how about buffering? ASEAN-led mechanism, through ADMM+, through ASEAN Regional Forum, through East Asia Summit, allow institutional-based, non-military-based balance of power. We involve no other institution or regional organization outside of Southeast Asia. You have this arrangement, where the regional institutions is a weaker states-led, but all powers and players at our time are all dialogue partners. So that allowed not just binding and building, but also buffering. Buffering in the sense that big powers will always compete, but let's then compete economically, institutionally, put pressure at the diplomatic meetings. As we talk, the timing of this is perfect, right? ASEAN meetings are ongoing, right? In a country, Laos. So all these binding, building, buffering, they are not something that magical or perfect or panacea that solve all the problem. There is no such thing in the world. But it does provide essential, indispensable platform to have some kind of power constraining, balance of power without clashing. Those are indispensable, but they are insufficient. Nothing is sufficient. So, but they provide an essential platform for countries to compete, to collaborate, rather than compete to fight. So with that, three Bs, I hope I have done my job and earned today's lunch. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your comments. They're extremely rich, and you have made my job as moderator very difficult because you all elaborated so distinctly and differently than things that were in the report that many of my prepared questions no longer quite work. But I want to pick up on this issue of competition. Mike, you started off your remarks saying that as long as we frame everything in competition, it's unhealthy. Dawei, you followed up by saying that when we speak of competition, the question is, what does victory look like, right? And this has always been one of my own critiques of like the U.S. national security, that says, hey, China is the only country with the power and intent to, threaten U.S. presence in the Indo-Pacific, establish global leadership, blah, 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 painting it as a threat, as all of you noticed. But then the strategy is defined by quote-unquote competition, but it never does, as you note, outline what the end goal is. Obviously, implicitly, it is continuing U.S. primacy and hegemony. But that's an extremely amorphous goal, right? And so I guess to your point about what would the end game look like, and if we're trying to figure out how we can reduce competition to enhance collaboration in the broader region, particularly Southeast Asia, which is a key goal of all of the policy recommendations. How would you see that ending? And I'm asking this to all of the panelists, because Cheng-Chwee, this gets to what Southeast Asia doesn't want, right? With the two blind spots. It does not want to be pulled in to a US-led alliance structure, and it does not want to face a future of automatic Chinese primacy. So how do you find a point that you think, Mike, I'd like to see what, if we could get a little bit more about what that would look like. What would enough, of US interests, of Chinese interests, of Southeast Asian look like, that we can envision some agreement around them? Because in the report, it's all about, we have to all agree that we want a Southeast Asia that is stable, that is prosperous, that is peaceful. How do we get from tensions in the South China Sea, et cetera, to there? Is there some lines that you think there could be agreement on?
I'll take a stab at
Sure.
it. There are a lot of questions there, and
Absolutely.
there may be some flesh wounds as opposed to hitting the target here. But let me take a stab at it. First of all, you mentioned the implicit goal, at least what does victory look like for the U.S.? You said hegemony and primacy. Well, those are totally unattractive even to our friends.
Absolutely.
I mean, how do the Japanese look at that, right? How do the Indonesians look at it, or India, right? So to the degree our implicit goal is primacy, now you got to say, what does that actually mean in real life? But very few people are going to sign on to that as a goal. So we have a goal that doesn't intrinsically bring a lot of intimate, positive cooperation, right? So I think that is, in a way, kind of what our goal is, but that's not really very attractive and feasible. I mean, look at the pivot was in 2010, 2011, right? And we were going to allocate more resource. I think we meant primarily military. There was the hope for economics, but the Pentagon has a budget and the economic agencies sometimes don't. So I think you've got that goal problem. Secondly, our colleagues, I was struck in Washington by the degree to which we talk a lot about process, but we're not delivering any goods. economic statecraft is a real problem for the United States because we retreat to, well, we want public-private partnerships. But how that translates to business is business will invest there, right? So you've got to have all the predictability, legal system, transparency, all of these things. We're willing to help on that, but we're not going to build the roads here, right? But they want the roads.
Absolutely.
Right, they want the power grids. So there's this kind of problem. So if the question is, what do? I think up our economic statecraft, right? I mean, you went to AID and frankly, there wasn't much resource behind all the talk. So I think that was a problem. Just one last thing, what do? Of course, there is the dynamic of great powers and they do compete and we all are worried about security and this all isn't illusory. But there is a balance between what I'd call reassurance and deterrence. And deterrence is built on threat. And the quotient of deterrence is going up and the quotient of reassurance is going down. So we need to up the quotient of reassuring things. And then that raises what are those things? And I think cooperation in healthcare. I didn't know until I went to AID that we had helped Cambodia almost eliminate malaria. Well, that's terrific. We ought to do more of that. We've worked with China until the COVID fiasco in health. We had CDC people in China and NIH had Chinese and all of this. This was terrific. It was totally unnecessary what happened, or at least I won't say totally unnecessary, but most unfortunate, right? So, and then we came up with another idea in the environmental area, plastic pollution all through Southeast Asia. Anyone who's been to a beach in Bali knows what I'm talking about, right? And so let's just find some really even modest things to cooperate and try to build on that. But I don't know, does any of that hit what you were asking, Henry?
It's all helpful, all helpful. Thank you. Professor Dawei, do you want to jump in?
Yes. Thank you for the question about the end game and the criteria for victory. I think actually sometimes we use these two terms, kind of, exchangeable. But when we were in the so-called engagement period, 1990s, anyone ask us the question about end game? What is end game for engagement, U.S. engagement with China? I'm not sure. Maybe some people here, maybe China, through the engagement, China will one day become a liberal democracy that integrated into a US-led international order. But today, many Americans deny that they had that intention at that time. I think some Americans have that intention, but not all, based on my knowledge. So at that time, we more or less feel that's a process. So we didn't think a lot about end game. When we use the term end game, it always implies that one side of this relation will end. I mean, like a Soviet Union collapse, then we see the end game of the Cold War. Or like maybe the US leave this region permanently. That's an end game. So probably we won't see that in my lifetime, I believe. So for me, I don't know the end game in that region, but I hope the criteria for acceptable solution is some kind of uncomfortable coexistence in the region. Both countries were there. Both countries are there, and also both countries accepted the reality that the other side will be there doing something they cannot. So that is second to the best solution, not the top choice. If so, I think then maybe one day after 50 years, 100 years, I don't know, we will have an end game. Like, for example, China's economy, a lot of people talking about China peaks. So maybe China's economy become 1/10 of today's size, then we will have no influence in Southeast Asian country. And that's the end game, right? But maybe that's 100 years later. Or maybe one day Americans, feel this region have nothing to do with me, I need to go. But that is not in the foreseeable future. But I hope until that day, I hope the process can be peaceful, the region can be stable, and we can still, as Mike said, jointly working on some specific issues and compete for cooperation with ASEAN country. I think that will be good for my criteria. Yeah.
Cheng-Chwee, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, thanks. I guess the best way for me to respond to Anne-Marie's questions is to build upon what Mike and also Dawi has already highlighted. Mike, I think, highlighted the importance of concurrent adoptions of deterrence and assurance, right? And then Dawi also highlighted about the engagement and about coexistence. So from smaller countries' perspective, those are really the means and also the approaches by the big powers. Smaller countries, we agree with all of them, but we also know that as weaker countries, you need all of those, deterrence, assurance, and all that, but you also know that you need to have some add-on. And those are not either or. Smaller countries, we hate either or. We think about and with, right? So all of the above, but you also need some new elements that would help us, weaker countries, to strengthen our very weak positions. And this is where the three-prong approach comes in. The three-prong approach that, if you're familiar with the hedging literature, Dawi mentioned hedging, and he said sorry, right? Because the hedging at the moment is like a very negative word, right? So he said sorry. But from our perspective, hedging is not a negative word, it's essential. And we basically talk about hedging without using the word hedging. But you might ask, if there are 3 points to illustrate what is hedging on the part of weaker countries, these are the 3 points. You see these 3 points, you know hedging is happening. And hedging is policy without pronouncement, because no hedgers will say that, hey, I'm hedging, right? Because they will increase the risk rather than reduce the risk. Hedging is not reduce the risk and manage the risk. So 3 things: active neutrality. Hedging is not taking sides, 不选边, right? Not taking sides. But neutrality, not taking sides, can be passive and reactive. No, hedging has to be active. You need to take active efforts to underscore, to maintain your neutral position. That's number one. But having active neutrality is not enough to be hedging, right? Secondly, inclusive diversification. Diversifier is human nature. Nobody, if you have a choice, you have options, want to put all your eggs in one single basket, be it the American basket or Chinese basket. Are you crazy? You want to put yourself at the mercy of a bigger guy? No. Inclusive diversification is a second element of hedging. Third and finally, I thought that is actually a very essential efforts of hedging, in the sense that it is about adaptive prudent offset. You have to do sometimes seemingly contradictory actions at the same time. As you upgrade your relationship with China, you make it the point that you would do something similar with the U.S. and also like-minded countries. Why is that? You do not know how things will evolve. You do not know who will be becoming stronger. You do not know who will harm you more than the other. You do not know how the big powers relationship will evolve. Nobody have crystal ball. So hedging is not about making speculation. Hedging is about avoiding speculation. How can you avoid speculation? You do things that might be concurrent, might be contradictory, concurrently, but in an adaptive way. Adaptive in what sense? If threat is growing, danger is growing, you invest more in the deterrence. If some kind of suspicion is increasing, you adapt by reassure more, you engage more, right? But fundamentally, we do want a coexistence, and not just between the big guys, but left some space for we, the weaker countries, to maneuver. Nothing is guaranteed, but congratulations, welcome to the real world, right? Nothing is guaranteed. And you need more options, more approaches, rather than less options. And I think that is the essence of hedging.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hedging. At this time, I am going to open it up to questions. Those of you at home, please post your questions in the Q&A box. I saw that Andy Nathan wanted to jump in, so Julie has a mic for you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask two questions. The first one to Cheng-Chwee. I think John or somebody said that one of your findings in Bangkok is that the ASEAN group should become more unified and become a center to sort of influence the behavior of the major powers. But what are the obstacles to ASEAN doing this? My understanding is that ASEAN is a snake pit of countries all hating each other and competing with each other, and 3 A's and 3 B's and 3 C's in ASEAN. So could you give us a realpolitik analysis of what's preventing ASEAN from being more effective, and what are the prospects that it could really do whatever it is, and how that would work, what a unified ASEAN would do? And then for Dawei, you said that we need some showcase of, I guess, of U.S. China cooperation. And I'd like to hear what those might be. So Mike said, clean up, plastic, get rid of malaria. Is that what you have in mind? Because I don't think cleaning up plastic, which I'm in favor of, don't get me wrong, I want to clean up, but I don't see that doing so together would alleviate the suspicion of China in Washington, where Chinese pressure on Taiwan, Chinese export, Chinese intellectual property rights, the tech competition that you mentioned, those are driving. I mean, Mike says strategic competition is not a good framework. That's the moderate framework in Washington, as you know. What can China do to reassure? You're talking about assurance, or what can Washington do for that matter, because Washington is surrounding China with troops. Washington is preventing Taiwan from, what would be showcase cooperation that would actually alleviate the mistrust in both capitals? Thank you.
Cheng-Chwee, you want to take the first part of that? The
Sure.
snake pit of ASEAN?
Thank you, President Eden, for this very sharp and spot-on question. I like that. And I like that, and I would also say that I preempted that question when I highlighted ASEAN is a three-eye entity, three-eye organization. This three-eye, I thought, actually reflects that ASEAN is never about either or about magic, right? Magic in the sense that you can actually assure or achieve so-called unity, effective. We are all students of policy, I think, not just SIPA, right? Science and beyond. And we all know that. No, those are desirability. I think when I talk about 3I, that actually shows that we are aware of there will always a gap between desirability and feasibility, right? Desirability in the sense that we all want unity effective, but we also know that in reality, this can be pursued but not be guaranteed, right? But you still have to continue to pursue for that. So it's imperfect, inadequate in that sense that unity and effective is the goal, and it's a process to do that, but nothing is guaranteed, which is why you need to be active and inclusive and adaptive to do more. No guarantee, but it would help us to maximize the benefits and also what is being desired. But let me elaborate that, apply that in with one example to show how it is, right? ASEAN, I think Anne-Marie would have told her students in many ways, 1950s, 1960s, Southeast Asia was seen as the Balkan of the East, right? Balkan of Asia. Why is that? Diversity, differences in identity, economic variable, all the social sciences variables. We are so different in all grounds. And we did have confrontation, right? It was a low intensity use of force. Indonesia on the part, and then against Malaysia and all that. Those patterns can continue until today, but you are not seeing that from happening. Why is that? I do think ASEAN economic interdependence and some balance of power does help that ASEAN countries, despite the differences, do not clash in the way that really scholar would highlight. So the current peace and stability, still problems, but we are not clashing. We are not consider that we need to use force. That already show some kind of achievements, right? But can we really solve all those problems, South China Sea? No. And you are right, Professor Nathan, when you imply that there are some intra-ASEAN differences. On South China Sea, unlike the mainstream portrayal is between ASEAN versus China, we know that it is not. Within Southeast Asia, we have different views. But do we really have to clash over South China Sea? Territorial problems? ASEAN story means that we need to manage, right? We need to manage, but we manage in a way that you use the ASEAN-led mechanism. You use some bilateral diplomacy, but at the same time, you also try to, use the earlier formulas, quote unquote, that we mentioned, right? Active neutrality and also inclusive bifurcation, but still adaptive prudence, so that you ensure that if things really turn bad, you have some options to hold on to, right? So I hope I answer your question in the Southeast Asia manner. Things are nuanced and there is no kind of a clear-cut arrangements.
John wanted to add one comment on the ASEAN, if you don't mind, Dawei, before turning to the second question.
Andy, thanks for your question. I've never heard of ASEAN described as a snake pit of countries hating each other, but but I understand your point in that, when ASEAN pretty much almost doubled in its membership in the late 1990s, right? You then had a set of countries that had various levels of political and economic development. And I think that's made it harder for ASEAN to coalesce in that regard on certain issues. If you look back at the end of the Cold War and you look at the Jakarta informal meetings, which led to a peace agreement in Cambodia after decades, that was ASEAN being very effective. Now with 10 countries, you look at the situation in Myanmar, there's less agreement. I think they certainly all are in agreement that they want the conflict in Myanmar to end. It's just a question of how involved can they be, and you're seeing maritime Southeast Asia differing. Their differences are more pronounced than mainland Southeast Asia. But I think the fact that they're still talking, it gets to Cheng-Chwee's point, might be ineffective at times, you might be inadequate at times, but the indispensability about it, the fact that they are meeting, that they are capable, that ASEAN is capable of bringing, has created a larger regional architecture that includes the United States, China, Japan, South Korea, and other nations. I think that's better that that ASEAN and overall larger regional architecture more broadly, it's better than that exists than it doesn't. So.
Okay, well, Andy, your question has really stimulated a desire for everybody on the panel to jump in, because David wants to jump in. So once again, my apologies,
No problem,
Dawei.
no problem, yes, please.
You always ask good questions, and I really, and your observation that competition is the moderate framework in Washington is actually true, right? The containment paradigm or some offshoot of that would be even more intense, I suppose. So
One that China will disappear. That's the mainstream in China and Washington.
in some quarters, yes. Yeah. I don't know if it's quite the mainstream, but yes. But I guess the point is, whatever on the spectrum of formulations, this isn't destined to be the most productive. It may be the most feasible rhetoric that can be used given politics, right? That I think may be true. But the question you're really asking is what can be done beyond plastics, right? Isn't that?
One word.
Right. Exactly, that came up. Yes, the graduate. Right. So I've always, for a long time, thought, okay, what really aggravates us? You've been reading recently that China, on its own, both naval and air forces, have been going near Alaska and the Aleutians and the Arctic, and really we're kind of beginning to react as China did when we were sending the Navy, or are sending the Navy, at 12.6 miles from the China coast, right? We say, yeah, ships can sail anywhere, anytime that international law provides. That's our basic position. But when China does that, actually, we don't react entirely differently. We can argue about safety of flight and so on. So it seems to me, and not everything has to be an agreement in writing, and it has to necessarily be public. But couldn't we jointly decide we don't need close-in surveillance that just raises nationalistic hackles to assert a right 3 times a month? Maybe we'll send a ship here and there twice a year or whatever. And we don't have to have a written agreement. We don't have to deal with the Congress, reacting to a formal agreement. We just have to take parallel actions with the objective of lowering the temperature, right? I think that, but I've been saying that for a lot of years and it hasn't happened. So for some reason, it's not feasible, even that. But that's what I have in mind. Not everything has to be a big agreement. We have to decide what is irritating each other and can we afford to do less of it. I think that, and then not going towards tariffs, which is just really bad economic policy, right? Does that even begin to get to, but I think your questions are right.
And now to the very patient participant.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nathan. I agree with what Mike said, but probably like reducing the frequency of surveillance. I hope it can happen, but in foreseeable future, maybe we can only see increase of the frequency. Just like I share my personal experience with my friends that this is my 7th visit to the United States this year. And in my previous 6 visits, the CBP at the airport took me to the secondary question on each visit. So I hope they can reduce the frequency that they gave me secondary question. So I ought to be honest, I told them, I said, if you question me for 1 or 2 times a year, I totally understand. But why you keeping me, there in the midnight, asking me the same question 6 times a year? Anyway, I protested, and this time they forgive me. They let me go directly. I thanked them, But back to question. Of course, we don't have the silver bullet. We don't have kind of showcase that we can solve the distrust, the mistrust into capitals. But I more or less look at it as regard it as a process. Today we have a 100% competition or confrontation. Tony Blinken talked about competition, confrontation, cooperation. At least we need 10% of cooperation. Today it's almost 0% of cooperation. So that's still, even we have 10 or 5% of cooperation, that cannot fundamentally change the mistrust, the distrust. But we can do 1 or 2 things with ASEAN. We can do 1 or 2 things in the Middle East. We can do something on AI. I mean, at least we need to send a signal to the decision makers, and also particularly the hawkish people in 2 sides, that this is not purely about confrontation and competition. Then I hope we can gradually expand the proportion of the cooperation. So for that regard, at my presentation, I mentioned the election here. I mean, I don't know who will win the election, but I hope, the 2 governments really play a key role here. Let's, imagine if President Xi and President Biden didn't meet in San Francisco or Bali 1 year ago, 2 years ago. Today, probably I won't sit here talking with you. So we are changing, the 2 leaders are changing, the 2 governments are changing the atmosphere a little bit. So if that can continue, we already improve it for 1 year. If it can be continued for another 4 years, I think the atmosphere could change gradually. And at the same time, I mean, we are all in, academic circle. So we need to continue to cooperate. We cannot just rely on the government. So this morning we were in Carnegie Corporation. They very generously support this effort. But what about, the private sector, the academic circle, ordinary people? They work together. They have some, but we need some flagship program. I'm not talking about tourists. I'm not talking about, international marriage, but I mean some flagship program to sending the signal out. Then that could, that could change the situation gradually. So again, I think this is a process, but it's a man-made and also, very carefully controlled, managed process to expand the cooperation and change the narrative.
Okay, thank you. I understand there's some questions here in the audience. Just raise your hand if you have one, and I will call to this gentleman right here first.
Hello, I'm Gabriel. I'm an undergrad student from Brazil. Thank you for all this information. It's been amazing talk. But I really want to ask Dr. Dawei about, for example, we had the experience between the United States and the UK when they had the transition of UK-led international economic system to an American-led international economic system, and took quite some time for the domestic agents in the United States to actually take a firm position, and that generated the Bretton Woods Agreement and all the institutions that came after that, and because of that agreement. And I'd like to ask you, in a case of a Sinocentric international economic organization, what are the biggest critiques on the current international economic system that are being discussed in China?
What do you mean by Sinocentric economic system? Can you be more concrete?
No, in the sense of we have organizations like the World Bank or WTO or FMI that were created, and they are American-led mostly. And what are the biggest critiques that are being discussed in China right now about this kind of organizations and how they work?
Yeah, there are a lot of criticism in China about current, you can say it's US-led, economic or financial system. For instance, the US, because of the hegemony of the US dollar, US can use that as a tool to sanction other countries. So I think the US is very, I would say, use the sanction, the tool, the instrument of economic sanction too much. And it's hurting the US itself. I mean, of course, it's hurting China, hurting Russia, but all in all, it's hurting the credibility of US dollar. So I think of course, a lot of this summer I was in Russia. They are talking about the payment system transiting payment system within the BRICS country. They are very enthusiastic towards that idea, but the other countries, including China, are not so enthusiastic towards that. But there are discussion there at least. This is one thing. Of course, another kind of thing is basically back to the Obama time. A lot of criticism about represented, if it's well represented for the emerging markets like China and India and other countries in the existing international institutions. The Obama administration agreed to increase China's voting share in the institution, but the Congress were very reluctant. But finally, it's approved. It's I mean, China's voting share has been increased, but it's still, I will say, well a lag behind the real GDP share of China's economy in the overall global economy. So there are all this kind of criticism. Having said that, I have to say, though I heard a lot of specific criticism about the existing, or you can say US-led system, but I haven't heard any comprehensive blueprint. Say we have this, let's replace the old existing system with this blueprint. No, I heard a lot of the specific criticism, but no comprehensive blueprint to replace it.
Okay, thank you. This gentleman behind you, please, in the shirt, and then we'll take one online question and come to the woman up front, please.
Sure. Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a second year student here at SIPA. Thank you so much for the time. My question is on cooperation and non-traditional security, such as climate change and environmental security. So when we see events such as Typhoon Yagi affect countries in Southeast Asia, I wonder if that presents an opportunity for countries such as the U.S. and China to collaborate in providing assistance, and if ASEAN can kind of coordinate such cooperation. Or because the U.S. currently provides aid through USAID or through its military, through humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So I wonder if tensions are too high between two countries bilaterally, or if that could be a possibility that ASEAN could kind of coordinate in the future. Thank you.
I know Anne-Marie is going to laugh, but I actually have a co-authored the article on hedging in non-traditional security cooperation. And I was using Vietnam as an example. I co-authored with the Taiwanese scholar Zhuo Zhengdong and published in Tsinghua Journal, OUP Journal, CG, right, Chinese Journal of International Politics, using Vietnam's way of engaging both US and China on disaster relief cooperation. It's not either or. It's not about the blind spot and all that, but how Vietnam does that indicates exactly the three elements that I mentioned. Active neutrality, not taking sides, inclusive diversification, and then adaptive offset, and also adaptive fallback position. The same logic can be applied to climate change or environmental protection.
Okay, we have an online question from Rocky Intan, who's actually a former graduate. He's a SIPA grad and currently at U Albany in the PhD program. And this is for Cheng-Chwee regarding hedging. And he said that for Southeast Asian countries, hedging likely requires maintaining equidistance between China and the US. Therefore, if one great power ups the ante and moves one direction, the hedger has to follow and move to a new equilibrium. Is that your understanding of hedging with equidistance in that manner? And if so, how can Southeast Asian countries manage that? And there's been a lot of critiques about this notion of equidistance, so I'd love to hear your view.
As if I preempted this question, I published an article a few months ago about explaining hedging and the case of Malaysian equidistance. And in the abstract, I make it very clear that equidistance doesn't necessarily mean equally distant or equally proximate. Impossible. You need to adapt in one way or another. But fundamental meaning of equidistance, meaning that you are not putting all eggs in one basket against the other, not taking sides, diversification, adaptive adjustment. So the same logic, flexible, adaptive equidistance, again, as I said, not necessarily equally proximate or equally distant, but it simply means that it is not taking sides, not putting all eggs in anyone's basket. It's a survival instinct for any weaker country in one way or another.
If I can just jump in on this 2 cents, because we often hear this in Rocky's Indonesian, in the Indonesian context, right? Indonesia is going to maintain an equidistant position. And former Foreign Minister Martin Natalegawa has come out and really critiqued this and been vocal. No, equidistant doesn't mean putting ourselves in the middle, because that means China or the US are defining the parameters of our policy. Rather, we need to be extremely certain about what Indonesian interests are, and then figure out how to go about that without putting one egg. So I think this concept of equidistance is really interesting. And now to the young woman up here, please.
Sort of a follow-up question on the previous question. So we know that China and ASEAN are now the biggest trading partner, and China is investing heavily in some ASEAN countries on infrastructure, railroad, and industrial parks like Laos and Malaysia. So my question is how ASEAN countries could both advance their national interest while maintaining this ASEAN cohesion on the international political arena under the circumstance that U.S. is calling its alliance to decouple from Chinese economy.
Who wants to take that one?
I think this question should entrap Professor Anne-Marie Murphy to respond. But very quickly, I'm not avoiding, so let me very quickly highlight a few evidence to show that your question is very good in reminding all the points that we made earlier on. For example, the reality is that as China's economic importance grows, U.S. continue to be an important economic partner for almost all ASEAN countries, right? So, for example, semiconductor, right? You know, U.S. is the most important partner, either for Vietnam or for Malaysia, who have been benefited from the shifting, supply chain realignment, so to speak. So, and U.S. continue to be important as an investor, as also the technological provider and all that. So we do not see it as a either-or issue. And therefore, as long as you are diversified, and it's not just about U.S. and China, right? European countries, Japan, South Korea is emerging. So Australia has always been there, New Zealand too. So we do not think that we are really in that so-called binary, US versus China. So many examples, economy and all that. And eventually, I think the so-called theory of strategic impossible trinity matters here. Countries, just like any rational actors, want three things together. Security. But if security is not at stake, then you want prosperity, but fundamentally autonomy. How do you pursue this? You need all the approaches that we highlighted. Active, inclusive, but also active.
Okay, thank you. We probably have time for one last question. The woman over here, please.
Thank you. I have a question for Professor David Lampton. I'm the visiting scholar from China, so of course I know a lot basically about China. So I also want to know more about the ideas and opinions from the US perspective. Of course, first I have to admit I'm not a very professional person in this field. So if my question is not wise enough, please forgive me. Because when we analyze the relationship between China and the US, if we look at this kind of thing from a historical perspective, I didn't mean anything wrong or badly. I just say US always have a strong competitor in history. Years ago, it was former Soviet Union. And after that, maybe Japan was regarded for a period of time. And do you think because now it's a time for China to be regarded in this position?
Time for China
to be regarded as a strong competitor for US, because you need a competitor, maybe from the, because you, in your speech, you also mentioned the driving force for, yeah. I'm also thinking about this, and I also thinking of finding can look at this kind of thing in a deeper way to find what's behind. In fact, I just, because it's an academic atmosphere, I don't want to annoy anything else. I just trying to think about this thing, or maybe in a completely academic way, whether because the political or economic circle needs this kind of, position, need this kind of competitors to be regarded. But the good thing is, if you just because we need it, then under the name of it, we still can have a lot of cooperation.
Okay, so I think the question is, from the U.S. perspective, is there a sense that we need a
Do we need
competitor,
an enemy?
a new enemy?
Is that,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Well, I guess I have a more ecumenical way to put this. And that is, I go back to Crozier, and he wrote The Functions of Social Conflict. And the way societies often choose to produce internal consensus is to define an external problem, which is the sociological way of putting what you said. But I think this isn't a disease unique to the United States. I think we can look that China also is subject to this kind of things. So I tend to see these things as reactive, and as we react to the perception that China's got us as an enemy, we're each building a certain amount. Now we've got consensus on China policy to a considerable degree.
The only thing in Washington on which there
Exactly.
is a consensus.
So I reject the notion that it's a disease totally or largely a function of the American system, character, imperialism, whatever we think it might be. I think the productive way to look at it is a process of each reacting to the other. And so how do we break that process? So that's how I would begin to think about this problem. And I would see China doing many things that justifiably upset neighbors, middle powers in Europe, and so on. We're both, in our own way, unsettling important parts of the world, right? So I don't like the kind of a unilateral definition of the problem. It's a relationship problem, not a unique society, a U.S. society. Now, just to give you an example, of course, our engagement was born of conflict that we both had with the Soviet Union, just to put it very simply, right? Nixon went to China to get arms control leverage over the Soviets, get us out of Vietnam. Some of that worked, some of it didn't. Later, economics became important. So, but now, I would say one of the things that really changed American views, and it affected me too, and that is when Putin shows up in February of 2022 in the No Limits Partnership. This looks like an awful lot when Mao went to see Stalin in 1949-50 and came back with a mutual cooperation, and bingo, we got Korea a few months after that. And the Americans remember that. And less than 3 weeks after Putin was in Moscow, bingo, Ukraine, right? And China. So what I would say is that we each have our own narratives, and we interpret what the other is doing in terms of our narratives. And certainly China departed from its historic longstanding policy on sovereignty. If you look at how China's reacted to Georgia in, I'll say, incursion, invasion from Russia in 2008, China was opposed to that. Was opposed to it and played an important role in, I think, dampening that down. And then you fast forward to 2022, and whatever we want to say, that's not what China's done. So, it's a process. We have these long memories. We have analogous situations we're always looking for. And that's why I say we need to do more to reassure each other. But that's not what we're doing. So, no, I don't think the United States is uniquely stricken with the functions of social conflict. It's true bureaucracies like the defense establishment have a mission that tends to move in the direction you're saying, but there are many other elements of our society that aren't. Is that, I don't know that that's where you thought I would go.
Okay, well, I regret that we are already over time, so I'm going to have to cut off this discussion. For those of you who want to read more, the report from the Asia Society, Asia Foundation, U.S. China-Southeast Asia Relations, the link to it, if you don't get a hard copy, or if you're at home, is in the chat. At this point, I think we can all agree we've had an extremely robust and very timely discussion. So please join me in thanking our speakers. And for those of you interested in this topic, on November 7th, Tom Parks, the Vice President of the Asia Foundation, we're featuring the Asia Foundation, will be here to discuss his fantastic new book, Southeast Asia's Multipolar Future, and it'll give us a slightly different perspective on how to think about the region. So I hope to see some of you then. Thank you.